Hi all, this is Andy from Moses.la. I'm going to be walking you through a new material I've made for a circular Healthbar. It's fairly straightforward, but I wanted the ability to be able to reduce and increase the circle gauge. So this is the base texture. Let's have a look at the alpha channel so you have an idea of what we're working with. So this is the texture with the alpha channel. I have, obviously, the green area is going to be the area that we're subtracting for the material, and the blue area, which I've purposely chosen base colors to color, is the one that we're going to be subtracting from. So you can do something similar. If you need to use colors, you can always overlay them later. You can use this as the base and then apply another texture on top of it. Let's take a look at the final result. Okay, so we have the health amount, or the percentage amount of the bar, from 0 to something. Let's make this bigger. 512 by 512. And you have the start angle of your health bar. So this one is really small, but if I shrink down from 100 to 0, I still get a nice effect of the bar filling gradually. Same thing with any distance all the way up to 350, because if you go to 360 it's a full circle, so we want to avoid that as much as possible. I have to try this actually applied onto a widget still to see if the fade amount of the texture is good enough, but as I said, the texture can always be replaced. So let's dive into the material real quick. The first thing that we're going to look at is how the gradient happens. So we have a radial gradient code over here. This is just arctan that creates a mask. Let me preview this node so that you can see what that looks like. It's a nice even angle. This nice even angle is processed through a cut. The cut, all it does is it's an if statement matched to an input vector. So the result of this would be basically, if I feed in a UV channel in here, and at 0.5, if I start previewing this node, maybe on a flat surface, there you go. You see that it's cutting off at 0.5. If I change this to like 0.4, it'll be 0.4 and 0.2 and etc. Set back to 0.5, bring that back in. Actually, I'll probably just close it without saving. Okay, so the gradient cut is really what is powering the whole thing. It allows me to get something that powered with an angle. Let's talk about the angle real quick. So I have the angle and it's clamped between 11 and 350 just because that's how I like it in terms of the texture I created. It can probably go from 0 to 360 if you wanted to have no health bar. You set it to 360 or 0. So the way that this works is it uses the basic unit circle ratio. So you know, it's 1 divided 360 is just to bring the angle back into a 0 to 1 range. So this angle can go up to 360 and it shouldn't have any problem in even going above that, because if you multiply you still get a result that is 0 to 1 in an angle, maybe more than 1, but it will still be in that range that it needs, because as you can read in custom rotators, the rotation angle is supposed to be 0 to 1 scalar. Okay, so with that done, let's see what that does. So when I apply the start angle to the radial gradient, to the gradient cut, let's start previewing that. This is what it does. If I move up the angle, the gradient will be cut at a different amount because of the nature of the angular gradient. So this is what we're using to power all the logic behind this. Now the health bar is based off of a different ratio, because we need to take into account whatever the maximum amount of our angle is, and we have to do some basic math to bring a percentage in Now percentages are usually into 100, so if I want 100% instead of 1, I'd have to essentially divide by 100. Then this value needs to be multiplied by the same angular ratio, because what the result of this is actually degrees. If you don't know it, this is good to know. Debug scalar. If you do that and preview this, it'll give you a nice value over there. And if you plug in whatever the value you have, it will give you the value that it is. As you can see, 320.9 is my starting angle, and it's returning that value with 100%. So if I set this to 75, you'll see that down below, 75. And if I tweak the percentage to 50%, it will be 75 divided by 50%. There you go. If I set this to 0, it should be 0. There you go. So that's what is really powering everything. And the rest of the stuff here doesn't matter as much, because you have your mathematical information to come to it. But now let's also have a look at that so that you can understand how it works. So we have what I labeled here as a base texture. First of all, this is the texture that you looked at, and on all your texture samples, if you're rotating them and doing stuff with them, you want to make sure that you set to shear clamp. Another thing I noticed is that I disabled sRGB and things look a little better. There was some compression issues or something that's similar to that with RGB. So the next thing that we can look at is the fact that I'm using RGBA because I want to do the same operation for the whole health bar, including the alpha, because then I use the alpha in the output, and it's a lot more convenient to have it already prepped. So let's have a look at what this node does by previewing it. So you have the gradient coming in. Let's back it up. Let's go to this one. So we have the gradient cut at the value that we told it to cut, and it produces this amount. This amount, however, is the one that we want to see, so we invert it, and we subtract the inverted mask from the main texture. This gives us the initial angle of the full health bar minus the hand cap. Notice how this would be the full texture, right? So obviously it's cut. So obviously it's just cutting it out. So we need to add in the moving end cap to that. And to do that, we use the custom rotator node, which produces the rotation. Without a rotation center, it will be on 0.5.5, obviously the center of the texture. So if I go and preview this texture, you'll see that it's the rotated circle. It is rotated by the initial offset amount plus 0.02, which you're probably going to have to manually adjust for whatever texture you're using. This value is also passed into a gradient cut so that it's producing a similar texture to this one, but 0.2 further down the angle. The -1 of that texture is the whole area, which we subtract from, well, okay, let's not get ahead. Start previewing that one. So we cut this rotated texture with the base cut, and what we get is the end cap right there. That's the part that we're interested in. Now this texture that's added at 0.2 rotation comes into play, because we want to basically remove the rest of the circle. So what we get when we preview that is actually just a sliver, little sliver, and it will roll around and attach to whatever the material is. So if we put the two together, so we have that texture, which is the corner, we have this texture, which is the end cap. If we put them together, we have the full health bar. This process is then repeated for just the green channel. which is the one that I am subtracting, with a few modifications. First of all, as you can see, I'm using a base end cap. This one, as you noticed, has no UVs, or, well, to be more proper, I should probably put in UV0 in there. There. So, what this texture does is it creates a base of the texture, to which we're then cutting off the excess based on the gradient cut. If I preview this node, it'll be a little tiny sliver. Okay, and it's starting at 0, 0 and going forward by 0.1 of the circle. So I'm adding, this node is 0, 0.1. So in reality, I could just feed a scalar of 0.1 into here. Not a scalar, rather a constant. And that's a little more proper. No need for the extra operation of the addition. Okay, so what this does is it creates the little sliver that you saw there. And you always need to clamp, so remember to do that. So this is our initial point for the start, for the health bar. This will be overlaid onto anything because we want that end cap instead of the rotation that comes in when you rotate the texture. So this is the rotated health bar texture, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, no, you won't see what I mean because that's not the actual one, is it? This one. So we're taking the original value and rolling it in, and this is the rotating one. So if you can see here, that's the hand cap. You have the beginning. At some point or another, there is a value that clips into here because of the rotation. And what this texture of the base end cap does is it basically clips that out and replaces it so that it's always the same, and no matter what, you're always at, this is 0 health, basically. So then we have the same operation that we did above repeated below, with the addition of an extra for the beginning of the clamp. What this does with the costume rotator is rotates the end cap just like before. Okay, maybe I'm not previewing it. There. So this one is the rotated texture just like before, but we're only taking the green channel and clamping it. We're cutting out the corner that's missing so that we get our end cap, and then from that we're subtracting the mathematical equivalent of the added angle. So we're still getting the +2, and once we subtract it from there, we get the little sliver that grows accordingly. So this texture plus this texture make up the growing health bar. After you put this in, we subtract the end cap so that we remove the end portion, and we paste it back in again so that we have the final product. So we have this texture and this texture, and now we're subtracting, or well, we're not subtracting it, we're just ignoring the green channel. I'm breaking out the float 3 components, and I'm making new float 3 components using the value that we just created, because all of this, I perhaps forgot to neglected to mention, is run by the percentage value rather than from the original angle. You can actually see here, that's the path for that one, and this is the path for that one. And you can see that this one here has no path because it is not related. It just takes the initial angle and 0.1 rotated texture. Or that's the rotated angle. The texture is not rotated at all. Okay, so once you add the two together, you get the final result. You're literally just pasting that in there, and then the alpha mask comes in. I think I need to start previewing and then stop previewing to go back to the original. So that's the whole material. Apply the changes I made, save the material as well. Go back here and test it again just to make sure. So we have the bar growing and we have the health working. Out of the many iterations of this I had, this is possibly the most performant with only 97 instructions. Even then, I don't think the instruction count matters too much, since this is kind of a vital part of gameplay, or it will be. And the next thing, it will be replacing this texture and making things look pretty. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you can make use of this. Have a great day.